Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw, what I felt, what I had to live with after that night. I still hear it sometimes. The sound of my breath catching in my throat, the way my hands shook, the pounding in my chest. I remember standing there, frozen, staring at something I couldn't believe was real. A part of me wanted to scream. A part of me wanted to run. And a part of me? It just broke. You ever been in a moment so shocking, so unreal, that your mind refuses to process it? Like your brain just won't accept what your eyes are seeing? That's what happened to me. 1 second, life was normal. The next, everything changed. And the worst part? A part of me knew. I felt it creeping in for a while. The little signs. The gut feelings. The moments that didn't sit right. But I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. Until I wasn't. Until I saw it. Heard it. Until there was no denying it. And in that moment, my world didn't just shake, it disappeared. Like I was falling into something dark. Something cold. Something I could never come back from. Before I tell you everything, I need to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed something you wish you hadn't? Something that changed the way you saw someone forever? Something that made you question everything? If you have, drop a comment below. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, hit that subscribe button. Because this one, you won't want to miss it. I don't know when it started. Maybe it had been building for a long time. Little by little, so slowly I didn't even notice. Or maybe I did notice, and just didn't want to admit it. Before that night, before everything fell apart, my life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. At least, that's what I told myself. My husband, he was always busy. Work, meetings, phone calls that never seemed to end. When he was home, he was there, but not there. His mind was always somewhere else. Even when he looked at me, it felt like he wasn't really seeing me anymore. I stopped trying after a while. Stopped asking him to notice. Stopped waiting for his attention. I told myself this was just how marriage was. People drifted, things changed, love faded into something quieter, something distant. And I had learned to live with that distance. But loneliness? That was different. It crept in at night when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold space beside me. It settled in the quiet moments of the day when I realized how long it had been since someone had touched me, really touched me, with intention, with meaning. I told myself I was fine, that I didn't need more than what I had. And then, he showed up. My stepbrother. My husband's half-brother from his father's first marriage. Younger than me, but not by much. He wasn't around much before, living his own life, doing his own thing. But suddenly, he was here. In our home. All the time. I didn't question it at first. Family was family, right? Maybe he just wanted to be close to us. Maybe he just needed a place to stay for a while. That's what my husband said, anyway. And I didn't argue. I didn't even think twice about it. He was charming. Easy to talk to. The kind of person who could make you laugh even when you didn't feel like laughing. And I needed that. Maybe more than I realized. At first, it was nothing. Just conversation. Just company. Someone who actually listened when I spoke. Someone who noticed when I was tired, when I was upset, when I was quiet. Someone who made eye contact, real eye contact, like he actually saw me. It had been so long since I felt seen. And maybe that's why I ignored the little things. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long. The way he stood just a little too close. The casual touches, harmless at first. A hand on my lower back as he passed by, fingers brushing mine when he handed me something. Small things. Forgettable things. Until they weren't. The house used to feel warm. Familiar. Safe. But as the days passed, the air changed. There was something different in the way he looked at me, something unspoken in the way we interacted. It was subtle, just enough to make my stomach tighten, to make my breath catch for a split second before I forced myself to shake it off. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading into things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew. Something had shifted. And once something shifts, there's no going back. It happened so subtly, so naturally, that at first, I didn't even register it. Just another day, another moment, Nothing special. Until it was. It was late afternoon. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has slowed down. My husband was, as usual, busy, locked away in his office, drowning in work, unaware of anything outside his screen. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, lost in my own thoughts, when I felt him behind me. Closer than he needed to be. I turned my head slightly, expecting him to step back, to give me space. But he didn't. He stayed. Not touching, not speaking, just there. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was just being overly aware of things that weren't really there. Then he reached past me, his arm brushing against mine, and instead of the usual quick, impersonal touch that comes with sharing a space, his hand lingered. Just for a second. Just long enough for my breath to hitch. I should have moved. Should have said something. But I froze. Not in fear, not in discomfort, but in something far more dangerous, uncertainty. Was I overthinking this? Was I making something out of nothing? I turned my head to say something, anything, but when I met his eyes, the words died in my throat. Because he was already looking at me. Not the way a brother looks at a sister. Not the way a guest looks at his host. It was something else. The moment passed, but something shifted that day. He started finding reasons to be around more. Little things, helping with errands, offering to cook, lingering in the doorway when I was alone in a room. And it was never anything outright inappropriate, nothing I could point to and say this is wrong. But it felt wrong. The way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his touch always seemed to find my skin, even in the smallest ways, a hand on my shoulder that slid down just a little too far, fingers grazing mine when I handed him something. Accidental. Always accidental. And yet, my body reacted before my mind could argue. A sharp inhale. A quickened pulse. A moment of hesitation before stepping away. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining it. That I was lonely, and my mind was twisting things into something they weren't. But deep down, I knew. Something was off. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. I tried to push it away. To tell myself I was being dramatic, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was just lonely, and my brain was twisting things that weren't really there. But once a thought like that settles in your mind, it doesn't just go away. It lingers. It waits. It whispers to you in the quiet moments, making you replay everything over and over again. And that's exactly what I did. I started thinking back to all the little moments, the ones I had brushed off. The way he watched me across the room, like he was studying me. The way his touch had changed, from brief and casual to something that held weight. The way his voice softened when we were alone, his words stretching out just a little longer, his compliments feeling just a little too personal. Had it always been like that? Had I just been too blind to see it? Or was I imagining things, making something out of nothing because I was starved for attention, for something that felt real? I kept telling myself it was nothing. But then I'd catch him staring at me, his eyes trailing over my face, my hands, my lips, and suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. It made me question everything. I started watching him the way he had been watching me, noticing things I hadn't before. The way he positioned himself whenever I was in the room, always within reach. The way his words were carefully chosen, as if he was testing the waters, waiting to see how I'd react. And I hated the way it made me feel. Because a part of me liked it. That was the part one didn't want to admit. The part that made my stomach twist in guilt. The part that made me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. But I wasn't. Was I? I tried to shake it off. I tried to convince myself that if something was truly wrong, I would know. That I would feel it deep in my bones, without hesitation. But that's the thing about situations like this. They don't hit you all at once. They creep in slowly, making you question yourself, making you doubt what you know to be true. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was crazy. But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I started avoiding him. Or at least, I tried to. I told myself it was for the best. That keeping my distance would clear my head, that the space would make everything feel normal again. If I could just go back to how things were before, Maybe this feeling, this heavy, suffocating thing sitting in my chest, would finally go away. But it didn't. Because the more I pulled away, the closer he seemed to get. At first, it was subtle. Coincidences. That's what I called them. I'd walk into a room, and he'd already be there. Sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone like he had nowhere else to be. Stretching out on the couch, acting like it was the most natural thing in the world. Always looking up when I entered, like he had been waiting for me. I started changing my routines. Moving differently. Finding excuses to be in different parts of the house when I knew he wouldn't be there. But somehow it didn't matter. He was always there. And then, it got worse. One night, I was in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself from the thoughts racing in my head. The door was open just a crack. Enough for me to hear the low murmur of voices down the hall. My husband's voice. His voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I told myself that. But then I heard something. A shift in their tones. My husband's voice dropping into something quiet. His voice following, softer, almost calculated. I stood up, inching closer to the door. Not thinking, just moving. And then, his laughter. Short under his breath. Like he had just gotten away with something. I couldn't hear what they were saying. Not clearly. But something about it made my stomach tighten. My hands felt cold. My pulse hammered in my ears. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to bed. But instead, I stepped out into the hallway, slow, careful, just in time to see him glance over his shoulder. His eyes met mine, and he smirked. It was barely there. A flicker. A split second of something knowing, something dangerous. But it was enough. I turned on my heel and walked away, shutting my bedroom door behind me with more force than necessary. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. What was that? What was I missing? I knew I had to say something. I had to ask, to confront, to put it out in the open. But the words sat heavy in my throat, unmoving. Because a part of me was terrified of what I might find. So I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was overreacting. And I let it go. For a little while, anyway. It happened on a night like any other. At least, that's what I told myself. The house was quiet. My husband had gone to bed early, exhausted from another long day of work. I wasn't tired. My mind was restless, my thoughts tangled in knots I couldn't undo. I told myself I just needed some air. That's why I got up. That's why I wandered down the hallway, barefoot, careful not to make a sound. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't expecting anything. But then I heard it. A voice, low, hushed. His voice. And then, another. I froze. The door at the end of the hall was cracked open. The light spilling out into the dim hallway was warm, golden, too inviting for a moment that suddenly felt so cold. I should have walked away. I should have turned around and gone back to bed. But I didn't. Something in me pushed forward. A force stronger than logic, stronger than fear. I took a step, then another, and then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. For a second, my brain refused to process it, like a bad connection scrambling the picture on a screen. My body locked in place, but my stomach dropped, free falling into something dark and endless. Everything around me blurred, sounds turning to static, air thick like I was drowning. But what was in front of me? That was clear. Too clear. He looked up. Our eyes met. And that's when I saw it. Not shock. Not regret. Something else. Something colder. Like he knew this would happen. Like he had been waiting for it. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, my hands curling into fists, my body demanding that I move, that I do something. But I couldn't. Because in that moment, reality shattered around me. And all I could think was, how did I not see this coming? I don't remember walking away. I don't remember moving at all. One moment, I was standing there, staring at something I could never unsee, and the next, I was in my room, the door shut behind me, my hands gripping the edge of the dresser so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was still racing. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. My skin felt hot, my stomach twisted so tight I thought I might be sick. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. Something I couldn't name. I should have screamed. Should have confronted him right then and there. But I didn't. Because I didn't know what to say. Because the truth was, I let it get here. I didn't stop it when I had the chance. I ignored the signs, the tension, the unspoken things hanging heavy in the air between us. I let the lines blur. And now? Now, there was no going back. The next morning, everything was different. But no one said a word. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing by the counter, coffee mug in hand like nothing had happened. Like everything was normal. Except it wasn't. I could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating, wrapping around me like a vice. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands shaking just enough for the spoon to clink against the side of the mug. I could feel his eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to demand answers, to make sense of something that could never be justified. But my throat felt tight, the words stuck, and the weight of everything pressed so heavily on my chest that I could barely breathe. Then my husband walked in. He kissed my cheek, murmured something about another long day ahead, and sat down at the table. Just like always. Like nothing had changed. Like our world hadn't just cracked open beneath us. And he, my stepbrother, just sat there. Calm. Still. Unbothered. Like he wasn't carrying the same unbearable weight. Like he wasn't drowning under the same crushing guilt. Or maybe he wasn't guilty at all. Maybe I was the only one falling apart. The rest of the day was a blur. I barely spoke. I barely ate. My mind kept playing everything back, over and over, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it all spiraled out of control. Was this my fault? Did I let it go too far? Could I have stopped this before it happened? The guilt was unbearable. The shame even worse. And the worst part? I still didn't know what to do next. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day. Not the next. Not for a long time. I wanted to. I wanted to open my mouth, to let the words spill out, to force someone else to carry the weight of what I had seen. But every time I tried, my throat closed up, my mind screamed at me to stay silent. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I let it fester. Let it live inside me, clawing at the edges of my sanity, poisoning everything I touched. I couldn't look at my husband the same way. He was still the same, distant, preoccupied, lost in his own world of deadlines and responsibilities. He had no idea that something inside me had snapped. That when he touched me, it felt wrong. That when he spoke, his voice barely registered in my mind. I couldn't tell him. Because what would I even say? That I had seen something I could never unsee? That the ground beneath our marriage had cracked open, even if he didn't know it yet? That the guilt, the shame, the disgust was eating me alive? And then there was him. My stepbrother. He didn't act any differently. Didn't avoid me. Didn't acknowledge what had happened. And somehow, that was worse. It made me feel like I had imagined it. Like maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Like maybe I was the one who needed to let it go. But I couldn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that hallway. Frozen. Helpless. Watching something unravel before me, powerless to stop it. I hated him for what he did. But I hated myself more. Because deep down, I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. Was this my fault? Had I let it happen? Had I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to? Because there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, where I felt something I didn't want to admit. Attention. Acknowledgement. A pull toward something that should have disgusted me. And that's the part that haunted me the most. Not just what I saw. Not just what he did. But how it made me feel. I'll never unsee it. I'll never forget it. And I'll never stop wondering. What if I had stopped it before it started? I don't know if I'll ever find the right words to explain what happened. Even now, after all this time, it still lingers. It still haunts me. Some nights, I lay awake replaying every single moment, dissecting every interaction, searching for the exact second where everything crossed the line. But the truth is, I don't think there was just one moment. I think it was always coming. I just didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to. And now I have to live with that. But what about you? What would you have done? If you were in my position, if you had seen what I saw, felt what I felt, would you have spoken up? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me in the comments. I need to know if I was blind, if I was weak, or if this was inevitable from the start. And if you want more shocking, real-life stories like this, ones that make you think, make you question, make you feel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because trust me, there's always more to the story. And before I go, I'll leave you with this. Loneliness can blind you. It can make you ignore the warning signs staring you in the face. It can make you accept things you never thought you'd accept. But some mistakes you can never undo.